When boyfriend and I first moved away from Armpit to a scrack around 1996 or so, we moved into an apartment building that was really a huge house broken up into 5 or 6 apartments. A few days after moving into the top apartment, we discovered that boyfriend actually kind of knew the couple on the ground floor. As it turned out, boyfriend had graduated with the girl, a blonde with a crunchy by me as in a Seagram's 80s perm. Now, we didn't realize this at first, but she was a complete and total Brittany, and he was the male counterpart. At first, they seemed nice enough. We hung out a bit, and went out a few times to the clubs. I even helped Brittany get on at the place where I worked, telemarketing, but almost twice what minimum wage was at the time. It wasn't until we had lived there for a couple of months that we found out rather by happenstance that the couple had a rather extensive opioid habit. I was at work one evening, and I had a terrible headache. Brittany came to my desk at break time. We usually went to eat together, and asked me what was wrong. I told her I had a headache, and asked her if she had any Tylenol. Well, no, but she had a painkiller. Turns out that she was talking about hydrocodone, and I politely declined it. Over the next few days she offered me a painkiller for everything from a tummy ache to being in a bad mood. That's when I started to catch on. As it turns out, Brittany and Brian's lives revolved around their pill problems. It was all they talked about. We didn't want to make enemies of people that we literally lived on top of, so we subtly started pulling back from the friendship. Eventually Brittany got fired from the job, and that's when the choosy beggaring began. They started out asking to borrow $20. We did it, and they paid us back. No problem. Next thing that happened is that they wanted to share their cable account. Since we were all in the same building we could run a line and no one would know. Their idea was that we take turns paying each month. Of course, we went first. I did not like this at all, but figured that if it went pear-shaped, we would have a legitimate excuse to get rid of them. The third thing that happened was that Brittany came to our door in tears. She said that Brian was downstairs, crying. She said that they had no food in the house, and that Brian's children were with them for the weekend and they were hungry. We weren't exactly domesticated then, so we had no food to give them. Boyfriend and I are soft-hearted, and we were kind of naive back then, so we lent them some money for food. I think it was $50 or so. The next day Brittany is back, and she's going on and on about Brian's pill issue. Not hers, no, it was all Brian. Sometime during the conversation, she says that Brian had made her lie to her parents and say they needed food for the children to get money for drugs. Boyfriend and I just looked at each other. We didn't say a word to her, but we were furious. A few days later, our cable was turned off. Since the account was in Brittany and Brian's name, we went down to their apartment to find out what was going on. They tried to cover it up at first by making excuses and hemming and hawing around, but it didn't take long to figure out that the bill hadn't been paid in over 2 months. We had given them money for the cable bill that month, but they spent it on something else. Gee, I wonder what. We ended up opening up our own account and they actually had the nerve to ask us to share with them. That's a nope from me, dog. They got very pushy about the issue and a few words were exchanged. It wasn't a pleasant conversation, but we finally had the excuse we needed to cut them off. The problem was that they would not leave us alone. They badmouthed us to other people in the building. They stole things from our cars. They called in noise complaints on us and sent the police to beat on our doors, waking us up at 2 and 3 am. There were a few other things too, but that was the final straw. I was just fed up. One night while watching TV a commercial for Voltrex came on, and I got an idea. As it turns out, the first few doses of the anti-herpes medication was free. All we needed was a name and an address to have free information and a voucher for free samples sent to our home. We dialed the number and sat back and waited. Now, I know the subscribing people to junk mail or dirty magazines is kind of a cliche, and we didn't really expect anything to come of it. What we had hoped for at most was a blow up of some sort. We figured that, if we were lucky, there would be a fight and some cheating accusations. Maybe if fortune really smiled upon us they would even break up. What we got was so much more. It was, in fact, glorious. About 10 days after we made the call, a huge ruckus outside got our attention. Brittany was in a rage. She was in the yard, screaming at Brian, calling him every name in the book. Brian was standing there haplessly watching as she threw his belongings into the yard. Clothes were everywhere. A TV and a lamp smashed on the sidewalk. Brittany sat in the middle of it like a blonde banshee in booty shorts, cursing and screaming at the top of her lungs. We were extremely gratified when she asked which of his feckin' hoss gave it to him. Eventually Brian lost patience and the two started brawling in the middle of the street. Beer bottles and gauntlets were thrown. A weave was snatched off. It was a scene fit for the Jerry Springer show. Eventually the police showed up, and Brittany and Brian were driven off in the city's free black and white cab service. They were taken to spend the night in the city's free hotel accommodations, aka the county jail. Apparently when the police intervened, the couple was found to be in possession of illegal prescription drugs, and a night in jail turned into multiple nights in jail. Imagine that. They never returned to the building and we never saw or heard from them again. For all I know, they are still in jail. Brief backstory. I grew up in a small Tennessee college town. Ended up leaving for 4 years for high school. Came back for college. During middle and elementary school, I had a close friend who we'll call Bree. Bree was a very bright young girl, good supportive family, had her future pretty set up. I ended up falling out of contact quickly when I left the town, yet when I came back the summer before college to look for a place, I was staying with extended family who lived too far from the college to commute. We had bumped into each other at a fast food chain. Turns out, her parents had divorced and she went through a total I hate my parents phase. Her parents were probably some of the nicest people I knew, tbh. That was evidently still ongoing, since she confided in me she was trying to move out. What a coincidence. We get back in contact, agree to house hunt together. She seemed the same, honestly, if not a little more opinionated. We eventually settle for an apartment. Good neighborhood, close by for me. I managed to snag a job while her parents were sending her money for her rent and whatnot. I had plenty in my savings from working my ass off the second I turned 16 and a few good scholarships, so money wasn't a horrible worry for me. We signed the lease. Everything is grand. Until the weekend. School didn't start for another 2 weeks, so it's not like I really needed the beauty sleep. However, it's still incredibly annoying to wake up finding your living room filled with random people and the very heavy scent of weed in the air. In case you don't know, weed is illegal in TN. I shrug it off. I'm not about to tell her how to live her life. She probably just throwing a housewarming party with some of her newer friends. I'm not exactly the most social person, so when I went out, because I couldn't fall back asleep, I just sat on the couch looking blankly at the TV. The thing is, I have very good ears. Listening to the random conversation around me, I gathered many of these people were very into doing illegal actions. A lot of it centered around weed. There were 3 different kids with backpacks, which I would later learn were dealers. It was a weed fest. I'm not personally against weed. I've tried it a few times and it just didn't really float my boat. Live and let live is my motto. The night went on as a normal party. A few beers, a shitload of blunts, the usual. I didn't partake and ended up going back to bed as soon as the noise died down enough. The week went by normally. Had a brief conversation with Bree about the spontaneous party. Oh, just wanted to show my friends my new place. Yeah, right. The next weekend, same deal. Tons of people, tons of music, tons of weed. Now, I'm a little annoyed, but no trouble had come our way, so I wasn't going to throw a hissy fit. JK, the trouble came the morning after. I went out to grab some snacks, and got stopped by a guy. Hey, do you live in that apartment? He pointed to my apartment. Yes, I confirmed. Could you perhaps dial down the weed smell on the weekends? I mean, I get it, I smoke too, but the smell keeps traveled through the vents to my baby's room, he requested. Of course, I'll talk to my roommate. To make a long, annoying talk with her short, she didn't give a crap. The next weekend, she was smoking again. I spent the entire night in front of the vent in the living room spraying it down with Febreze and some scentless spray a dealer gave me when he saw what I was doing. It didn't help. Sunday, he was at our front door, explaining to both myself and Bree that if we didn't dial it back, his wife would be calling the cops. She did. The next weekend, There were usually 20 to 30 people in the area for her parties. They weren't huge, but I've still never seen that many people duck behind furniture and dive into rooms as they did when the now all too familiar cop knock hit the door. Seriously, it took them half a second to scatter, and surprisingly quietly too. So, there was a cop at my door, for a party I wasn't even involved in. What the hell? They ended up being pretty chill, saying we get it, just dial it down, and leaving. But that was just the beginning. They came 2 more times, each time with the same response, but on the 3rd visit they ended up scanning our IDs. I do not need this shit on my record. They easily had probable cause. The attendees always left at least one piece out in the open, like idiots. I usually put up with a lot before I snap, and after countless pleading with Bree, she still refused to stop the partying. I decided I'd have to make them leave. The next party, the cops would no doubt surface. I managed to drag Bree out of the house to the grocery store, claiming I'd buy her snacks. Leaving her to choose, I left to the bathroom and made a rather nerve-wracking call. I knew if they showed up while we were gone, the attendees would have to open up the door. Since they were playing music so loudly, the police would know they were home. I kept Bree occupied as long as I could before she got a frantic call from one of her lovely friends. The cops were there, with no one in their right mind. The cops ended up opening the door to 8 stoned people. Bree immediately forced us to leave and go back home, and minutes after arriving, 3 of her friends were pulled away in handcuffs. Apparently, they had warrants. I was always listening to them while they partied. I'm surprised only 3 were taken. Sending everyone home, I slept like a baby. Nobody came over after that, since the house was officially a hotspot for cops, and it wasn't long until my friend wanted to move out. I ended up meeting a nice guy who was still looking for a place in college, and he eventually signed onto the lease to replace Bree. Looking back, this was honestly incredibly stupid, seeing as I could been charged as well if they had searched the house, since I was on the lease. But seeing her friends, which I had slowly been growing a festering hate towards, get dragged away in handcuffs was incredibly satisfying. They did end up getting released a few days later, after making some deal, so their lives weren't totally ruined. Haven't talked to Bree since, though. If you enjoyed the stories, slap the like and subscribe button for more of them, and don't forget to support the original writers with an upvote. Links are in the description. Peace out, and catch you tomorrow.